He was a good man. There wasn't anything that would trigger us to believe that this heinous crime happened.
A woman accused of being involved in a high-profile California murder case has entered a guilty plea, and now she gets to go home. Her co-defendant, a former professional baseball player and son-in-law of the victims, still faces trial. Plus, the victim's daughter has sued her own sister, claiming she was involved. We are going to take a closer look at this case that is full of twists and turns. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It's been nearly 4 years since an older couple were attacked in their Lake Tahoe, California home, leaving their family and their community devastated. Police in Placer County say 70-year-old Robert Spohr and 68-year-old Wendy Wood were shot after a masked and hooded gunman entered their home on June 5th, 2021. Now, Robert was killed, but Wendy actually survived 2 gunshot wounds to the head, seemingly managed to call 911 on her phone. She was immediately transported to a trauma center out in Reno, Nevada. And Adrian Spohr, this is the couple's youngest daughter, told reporters that her mother had to relearn how to walk, to talk, to eat, everything. But also said that she was strong, that she was committed to getting justice for her husband of nearly 45 years.
The single biggest impediment to her healing is not knowing who did this to her. And that would enable her to be able to move on past the grief of losing her husband of 50 years and to be able to fully recover. Every single day you think about this. Every single day you take a second look around your surroundings. You lock your doors, you beef up your security systems. And I live for the day that I don't have to think about that and that I can tell my mom that it is safe to come and spend time in the house that she built and that she loves.
Now, unfortunately, Wendy took her own life about a year after the shooting. Adrian told the media that her family blames the shooter for her death as well. Now, Placer County Sheriff's Office, they released surveillance video from outside the home and nearby showing a man with his face covered moving up the Spohr's driveway on the day of the shooting, and officials said he waited for the couple to come home, and that's when he opened fire.
In examining the scene on the day of the murder and the attempted murder of Wendy, nothing seems to be missing. Nothing seems to be disheveled. It wasn't a crime of opportunity where somebody just let themselves in and did this. This seems to have been premeditated and targeted.
So officials, they hoped that that security footage would generate new leads. But the case seemed to be getting cold. In fact, in 2022, the Spohr family offered a $150,000 reward for anybody who could provide information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of that shooter. But it turns out the suspects in this case were a lot closer to home than they might have thought. To talk about this, I want to bring on California attorney Adante Pointer. Adante, thanks so much for coming on. This is such a terrible and sad story. Before we even get into the arrests in this case, just your initial reaction to an attack like this. I mean, do you see a lot of crimes directed towards older people like this?
Well, in recent years, you are seeing an uptick in home invasions and elderly people being targeted, within the communities for crime. But a violent crime such as this, no matter how frequent or how common you might think the headlines are, this one is definitely shocking.
It really is. It really is such a cold-blooded attack. And when you think about who might have done this, now we go to 2023. Because the Placer County Sheriff's Office, they announced the arrests of 2 people. The Spohr's son-in-law, Danny Serafini, and his former nanny, Samantha Scott. Now, the family tree here is a little bit complicated, so I want you to stay with me. So Robert Spohr, Wendy Wood Spohr, they are the victims in this case. Their daughter, Erin, is married to Daniel Serafini. The two lived in Nevada, where they had opened up a bar called The Bullpen, which was featured actually on an episode of the reality show Bar Rescue several years ago. Erin Spohr told the San Francisco Chronicle in recent years that she and Serafini had sold the bar in Sparks, Nevada a long time ago. And here's something to know, too, about Mr. Serafini. If that name sounds familiar to you, You might be a sports fan because he was a former professional baseball player. Yep, his MLB profile shows he had stints all over the country with teams like the Minnesota Twins, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the San Diego Padres, all as a pitcher. His career in the United States, though, ended in 2007 after he tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. That's according to outlet KCRA. But they also report that he continued playing baseball in Mexico. Now, Samantha Scott was reportedly Serafini's former nanny. According to Adrian Spohr, Scott was also a close friend of her sister Erin. And that relationship's going to be very important as we get into this a little bit later. But the two suspects were arrested in separate Nevada cities back in 2023. They were flown to California to face charges. By the way, the powerful background checker Truthfinder actually shows Serafini's arrest in Nevada as part of his criminal history. It's listed as arrest of fugitive from justice in another state upon complaint and warrant in October 2023. And by the way, big picture here, Law&Crime. We partner with Truthfinder. We use it all the time to get details on people involved in our stories. It's a great resource, but even if you don't work in true crime, this is an excellent thing to kind of give you peace of mind. It's one of the largest public record search services in the United States, and with a paid subscription service, you can get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. So if you're interested right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. You just got to go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. Now, Adante, investigators, they're always going to look into close family members and friends as potential suspects. You have to imagine that's the first place you look, right? Does it surprise you to learn that people so close to the Spohr family were accused of murder and it took investigators this long to try to seemingly put the pieces of the puzzle together, assuming these two people are responsible?
Yes, it is a little alarming and gives you pause to try to figure out how did so much time pass between what would essentially amount to be, it appears to be more of a random, or you'd have to be a targeted murder, essentially a hit job of sorts on the Spohrs, and for them to be elderly and not people who you would think are delving in the type of lifestyles that would invite or bring violence. For it to happen, you would be looking for a motive, and oftentimes it's financial, and those are the people who tend to be close to you, your family members or your spouse.
And I'll talk about, Scott's involvement in a minute because she has a very interesting legal update that we want to talk about. But although investigators said they don't think that anything had been taken from the home during this crime, Serafini did end up being charged with first-degree burglary. That's our understanding. And his other charges include murder with an enhancement of lying in wait, child abuse, or child endangerment, although it's not really clear what exactly that charge is connected to. Adante, can you tell me why he would have been charged with burglary, if that's true, and, child abuse or endangerment? I'm not sure I quite understand those.
Yeah, well, all those charges as it relates to child endangerment as well as the burglary arise out of what he's accused of doing, which is gaining entry into that home, which is unauthorized entry. So that's the burglary, the entering into the home, and then shooting and killing his mother and father-in-law. And did that at the time when the children were present in the home, because grandma and grandpa had just come back from taking the two grandchildren on a boat ride. Imagine that. And that's why the idea that it took so long for the police to zero in, if you will, on Serafini, as well as looking at all the family connections, is a little shocking, because who would have access to the home?
Do you think the evidence against Serafini is strong?
At this point, it's looking very, strong. Of course, we haven't yet to hear the defense rebuttals to the different, frailties or the shortcomings in the evidence in the case against him. I'm sure they have to say something, but you have video, you have what appears to be a lifestyle, and you have a connection. The question may be motive, only because my understanding is his wife, Erin, did not, or I should say she had a prenuptial agreement that was going to prevent him from benefiting from the windfall of any of the money from the insurance policies for the death of her parents.
I'm going to talk about money in a minute, because this is where the family, takes another sad turn. But so Scott was originally charged with murder alongside Serafini. But talking about a legal update, last week, the district attorney announced that Scott had entered a guilty plea to a violation of Penal Code Section 32, which is our understanding to be that is the statute that covers being an accessory to a felony after the fact. So a Placer County Sheriff's investigator previously testified at a hearing that Scott had said she'd given Serafini a ride on the day of the shooting. And Scott's lawyer said there was no evidence that she actively participated in the killing or aided and abetted or conspired in any way. She faces up to 3 years in prison at a sentencing later this year, but for now she's not in custody, has been released. Serafini set to go to trial in March. She's entered a not guilty plea. Adante, your reaction to that guilty plea, potential sentence, walk me through that.
Yeah, sure. She pled guilty to accessory after the fact, which is essentially saying that you weren't, or that she was not a part of the planning. It didn't personally take place in the actual shooting and the killings. However, she should have been aware, or she knew that he had committed some sort of crime and had assisted with covering up or helping him to get away with said crime, i.e. these murders, or I should say attempted murder, and then the later killing, the shooting. So she faced charges based upon her involvement with helping him cover up the crime and or to try to get away with the crime. And 3 years is the maximum sentence. I imagine the judge will decide how much time to sentence her to based upon her involvement, participation, and how key or critical the items of information is that she gives to the DA in their prosecution of the murder case.
That's exactly what I'm going to ask you. Is she going to have to testify as part of this deal? What would she testify to if she, wasn't a part of the actual killing?
Yeah, she certainly could be called as a witness. And although she wouldn't be able to give testimony as it relates to the planning or to what was led up to the shooting and the killings, or even what happened during the killings, she certainly could testify to any assistance she provided, picking him up. And when I picked him up, he was sweating, or I saw some blood droplets on him, or he told me to get rid of these clothes, or he showed up at my door and wanted me to hide him there, and things of that nature. That's the type of testimony, which are all indicators of guilt that she could provide at trial.
And I'm sorry I don't have more information about, what the evidence is against him or was against her. It's kind of limited at this point in terms of what was been publicly released. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more information on that. But I will tell you this. In a statement, Adrian, again, the couple's daughter, said, "When I learned on October 20th that my sister's husband, Daniel Serafini, and sister's close friend, Samantha Scott, were arrested for the shooting of my parents, I was shaken to my core. This was a heinous, calculated crime. My parents had been incredibly generous to Daniel Serafini and Robert Spohr throughout their marriage. Despite being pressed for my opinion, I cannot comment on my sister's level of involvement at this time." Very interesting, because we're going to get to that, because as the criminal investigation is underway, we now have civil litigation. So Adrian ended up suing her sister, Erin, as well as Serafini. And then after Serafini and Scott were arrested a few months later, Adrian's attorney filed an amended complaint in 2024 that named Scott as well. And what started as, maybe a fight over inheritance has now been allegations that this was a killing where the motive was greed. So we have this amended complaint, and it reads, quote, "Plaintiff's decedents were also the parents of Robert Spohr and the in-laws to Daniel Serafini. Robert Spohr and Daniel Serafini sought monetary gain through the death of her parents and the inheritance she would receive. Robert Spohr and Daniel Serafini were long financially dependent on Wendy Wood and Gary Spohr. Robert Spohr never experienced any success as a horse trainer, and Daniel Serafini failed to keep any reasonably paying job following a series of bad investments that led to the loss of all the money he made as a professional baseball player." By the way, they're referring to Gary. That's his middle name. It's Robert Gary Spohr. So they became tired of asking Wendy and Gary for money and instead to decide to kill them for their hard-earned money. After failed attempts at a murder-for-hire plot on information and belief, Robert Spohr convinced Daniel Serafini and their mutual friend Samantha Scott to participate in the murder of plaintiff's decedents. Robert Spohr formulated a plan to lure her parents from their home in Homewood, California, so that Daniel Serafini could enter the home and lie in wait. Once plaintiff's decedents returned to their home, Daniel Serafini emerged from his hiding spot and shot both of plaintiff's decedents in the head. Following the attack, Robert Spohr and Samantha Scott assisted Daniel Serafini back to Nevada, where the three then took steps to hide the tools of their crimes while collectively covering those crimes up. Even today, Robert Spohr cowardly refuses to come forward while her co-conspirators remain in jail, charged with the very crimes in which she initiated. Now, a quick reminder here. Placer County authorities never charged Robert Spohr in connection with her parents' deaths, but according to this lawsuit, Wendy herself believed Aaron was involved. Quote, following the shootings, Aaron Spohr visited her mother with Samantha Scott under the false pretext of concern for her mother's well-being. Instead, Aaron Spohr and Samantha Scott were there only to monitor Miss Wood and her memory regarding the attack and to ensure she never pointed the finger at her daughter, Aaron Spohr, for masterminding the killing of her father and eventually her mother. Wendy Wood addressed Aaron Spohr multiple times about her role in the murder, explaining clearly to her that she suspected her of being involved. Wendy Wood eventually disinherited Aaron Spohr because she was confident of her role in the homicide. So, Adante, that is some serious allegations there. What do you make of that?
Those allegations are the type, it's like of a person's nightmare. You know, that's a mother essentially from the grave telling her daughter, I know that you masterminded the death of my husband, your father, and also tried to kill me. And I'm going to make sure that you don't get a penny of my money. I'm going to disinherit you. And I'm also going to probably put the pressure on the other daughter to file this lawsuit so that it would be public in terms of what really happened to set the record straight.
But if she wasn't arrested, how much credibility are these allegations? How credible are these allegations?
Well, you know, the fact that she wasn't arrested is a separate analysis because it is a separate legal standard. You're talking about probable cause. You're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt as relates to getting a conviction. That is a different set of standards as opposed to a civil case. A civil case, more likely than not, more credible than not, more probable than not, you're more talking about a 50% plus type standard versus a beyond a reasonable doubt, which is 90% plus. So you could still have a civil case and a civil lawsuit like you have here, but no arrest.
And when she uses terms that we see in a number of lawsuits, upon information and belief, that signifies to the reader that, you know, I have reason to believe this. I can't necessarily prove it right now, but either someone told me or I have reason to believe it. I'm taking it as true. Does that show perhaps a weakness in this case, or maybe why an Aaron Spohr wasn't arrested and charged?
Absolutely. When you see those magic words on information and belief in a lawsuit, that's your antennas immediately go up. Why? Because that is about the easiest way for a lawyer to explain away what might ultimately wind up to just be speculation and conjecture. However, the way it's supposed to be used when it's put in the lawsuit is you're saying, look, I don't necessarily have all the information right now, but I have some information that leads me to reasonably believe what I'm telling you is true. But if you give me a chance to this lawsuit, I'm going to prove it up through the discovery process. So there it is.
These allegations in this civil lawsuit against Samantha Scott, so this purported nanny, the one who just pled guilty to accessory after the fact, she was released. She's going to be sentenced. She could face maybe 3 years in prison. But if you read the lawsuit, it's that she played an instrumental role in this attack. Yet her guilty plea and what she might be sentenced to, that is not consistent with that. It's that she only knew what was happening, or she was only a part of something after the fact. Does it concern you what you're reading in this lawsuit versus what the criminal liability is for Samantha Scott? Does it concern you that she's now been released pending sentencing?
Yes, the lawsuit is much more hard charging and definitive about her role, while as the fact that she is being released took a deal that would get her up to 3 years in prison, but is walking free as of today. Those two don't balance out. And the reason why may be because the way in which what the police can prove at this stage is much different than what the people who are filing the civil lawsuit and who wrote that civil lawsuit think that they can prove later on through the civil discovery process. So two different standards, and through the civil case, an attorney has a much greater opportunity to build a case than on the criminal side of it.
Now, I should also tell you, so Adrian and Aaron Spohr, they apparently share property gifted to them by their parents, or at least that's according to the lawsuit. And Adrian is suing for wrongful death, survival and survival damages, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And in the section arguing for survival damages, the lawsuit reads, as a legal, direct, and proximate result of the malicious, despicable, cruel, and unjust conduct of defendants, and each of them, including those 1 through 10, inclusive as described in this complaint, those are unnamed defendants, plaintiffs have sustained damages resulting from the loss of love, affection, society, service, comfort, support, right of support, expectations of future support and counseling, companionship, solace, mental support, as well as other benefits and assistance of plaintiffs' decedents, all to their general damages in a sum in excess of the jurisdictional limits of this court. And it also says that Adrian will be deprived of the financial support and assistance of her parents, wants the defendants to cover the cost of the hospital, the funeral and burial expenses for the victims. So that amended complaint was filed in November of 2023 after the arrests. In September of 2024, a stipulation order was issued to pause the civil proceedings until the criminal trials are over. So that now brings us to a different set of scenarios. First, Adante, talk to me about what do we expect from wrongful death actions like this? They're unique, right? What do we typically see and how they're actually, how do plaintiffs go about it? How do they prove their case? What are you expecting in that civil trial?
Yeah, in the civil case, an attorney has a lot of different tools available to them in order to help prove up their case, be it depositions, which is taking a sworn interview under oath, be it sending out subpoenas for records, for hiring experts, for actually taking the depositions of the named defendants. And the defendants have an opportunity to take the deposition of the people who filed the lawsuit. So there are much more tools available to both sides to either prove up or to defend a case versus in a criminal case where the prosecution is doing they have their ability to also obtain information, but not to the same extent as a civil case.
And talk to me also about why you would pause the civil case while you wait for the criminal case. And let's say there's a situation where, Serafini's actually found guilty or he's acquitted. How does that affect the civil case?
Sure. Well, I'll start at the end and work my way to the beginning. So if Serafini by some way is acquitted and therefore found not guilty of these charges, the civil case can still proceed because the criminal case will not dictate what happens in the civil case, nor will the civil case dictate what happens in the criminal case. And because of that, a judge in the civil case will stay or put a pause on the civil case being litigated or worked on because the defendants have Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. And so you can see a scenario if they did not have the stay or the pause in the civil case while the criminal case is still pending, those defendants would have to come and sit down with Aaron's attorneys, then be questioned under oath, likely tape recorded, and then whatever they say there could be played or used against them. And we all know the phrase in a court of law, i.e. the criminal prosecution. So they could very well walk themselves into prison or into a case or into a conviction by messing up and saying the wrong thing in the civil case if they were to sit down and give a deposition. So any attorney worth their salt would not allow the civil case to go forward while their client is facing criminal prosecution.
It's messy. It's sad. It's a really interesting legal development that we talked about with respect to Samantha Scott. And hopefully we get a little bit more information about the case against Mr. Serafini, because I think we all want a little bit more answers as to what happened here. But Adante Pointer, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it and appreciate you. Great legal analysis, both on the criminal front and the civil front. He can do it all, everybody. Adante can do it all.
We try.
All right, everybody, what a case, my gosh. But that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.